Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us again this evening on this special program, Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. And I'm sure that Prof has a usual greeting that he wants to bring to you again this evening. Prof.
Thank you very much, our viewers. Since we met last Thursday, I've been looking forward to our interaction today. And in the past 48 hours, as events have bubbled all over the world, that has even increased my appetite for this interaction with you. So, welcome to our program, our mutual program.
Fantastic. Thank you, Prof. And we're just going to dive straight in this evening to the loads of points that we would like to hear your comments on. But before we do that, there is a point that we wanted to touch on. There were some comments from last week that we were not able to address fully. And that's the question regarding the encyclicals that popes usually put out and the implication of that, particularly with the elections in the United States, and some things we can pick out from what the Pope has put down in his comments. Prof, do you want to readdress that point on the Pope and the encyclicals that they put out?
I'm sorry, I don't understand because I thought I dealt with the issue last week. Uh, you,
Ah,
if this is coming from one of our viewers or some of our viewers, you
yes,
will
sir.
have to be more specific for me to
Ah,
address to know what to say.
yes, sir. One of the viewers wanted to understand how we place the spiritual position versus the political position of the Pope and whether or not they should take such positions.
Oh, I see. Um, well, the spiritual position that the popes take that come out in the encyclicals have political connotations. Not that the popes are behaving as politicians. Most certainly no. But it is just that the encyclicals, grounded in the Bible, have implications for current issues in the world. Um, take Pope John the 23rd, whom I still maintain uh, was and is still my favorite pope. There are two of his encyclicals which still resonate with me today. Not as a Catholic, I'm not a Catholic. And our viewers shouldn't worry. I'm not about to pretend to be a professor of theology. I'm still a professor of political science. But take the Mater et Magistra, where Pope John the 23rd addressed the issue of the application of natural law to the international community. And where he was stressing that the international community is not just a jungle out there where heads of states could behave anyhow, but that there is natural law. He didn't use the term divine law, but natural law. The development of international law actually started with natural law embedded or distilled from, divine law. And to that extent, the Pope, while preaching a divine message, was also addressing a political issue. Uh, I can't remember now what was happening in the world at the time that he issued that encyclical. But I mean, if I were teaching a course now, at a time when the United Nations agencies are under attack by some countries, and I read that encyclical to my class, it will be to show them that the international community is still there. It is a community. The world is not just an atomistic collection of nations. It is a community, but it's a community grounded on natural law. And I will quote that encyclical. The second encyclical by the same Pope John the 23rd is Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. If there's a war going on, and if small nations are being bullied, are being brutalized by big nations, powerful nations, and you come out with an encyclical titled Pacem in Terris, peace on earth. Actually, your that encyclical, the message there is directed at the superpowers. And yet, who will get up and proclaim that he does not believe on peace on earth? Take Pope Benedict. His own, he issued several encyclicals, but the one that I remember, off the cuff now, was called Spe Salvi. Spe Salvi. In hope we survive. In hope we survive. Now, that's like the things we used to say when we are confronting tyrants, when we are demonstrating, or when we have been cheated. Keep hope alive. Now, that's the political rendition. Keep hope alive. But when Pope Benedict issued that, the literal translation from Latin is, in hope we survive. Not just that we even exist. Our survival is based on hope. You cannot give up. And I could easily say this, or someone could easily say this to the Black Lives Matter movement, even though Pope Benedict issued that encyclical long before this thing came on. Again, I can't remember what was happening at that time when he issued that encyclical. The latest encyclical issued by Pope Francis, titled Fratelli Tutti, fraternal love has no geographical boundaries. And geographical boundaries, of course, encompasses racial boundaries, cultural boundaries. And this was, again, you cannot accuse the Pope of being political, because he actually took this from the teaching of Saint Francis of Assisi, who, in preaching to his brothers in the monastery, I was telling them that, in fact, um, greater is the love to a brother you that is you cannot see than love for your brother that is just next door to you. And again, that is grounded, if you like, in the Bible. Remember the saying of oh, well, don't let me uh, don't let me show my ignorance. I don't remember who said it, but in the Bible, I remember someone saying, how can you love God whom you cannot see, if you cannot love your brother whom you can see? So that's an exposition that St. Francis brought out in his own teaching. And that's the Pope Francis 2 weeks ago or so took his own encyclical from there. But you can know what he's talking about because we're in a period of COVID-19 where we have all closed up shop. Boundaries have been re-established and reinforced. Some people are building walls, between Mexico and the United States in terms of COVID-19 vaccines. People are already buying them up and going to hoard them, while there are, agencies, UN agencies, NGOs who are preaching that that COVID-19 vaccine should be made available to the global community. Because in a way, if 99 people in a room have been vaccinated and one has not been vaccinated, that one can infect the 99 others. So beggar my neighbor's policies will not work. So really, that was what I meant when I said that, that the papal encyclicals, while religious, have political connotations that you cannot dismiss or you cannot ignore. That's what I had in mind.
Fantastic. I'm sure that that person would be satisfied. So that perfect response, Prof. But while
But
we
but
talk about,
please, if I've made a mistake, I beg my Catholic listeners to forgive me. I am not a Catholic, and I'm not a Reverend Father, and I'm not a professor of theology.
all right, so I'm sure, Prof, they would forgive you for that. Um, while we're talking about this message of hope that some of these popes have raised over the years, Prof, there is a disturbing trend that we're seeing across many nations of the world today. Thailand, we're seeing a lot of issues in Thailand's protests. Many nations in Africa, we're seeing a lot of protests there as well. Um, Prof, is this the beginning of a major uprising across all the nations of the world? And how far do we see this kind of protests going? Would people ever be satisfied?
As long as there is injustice in the world, people cannot be satisfied. Uh, I remember the words of John Lewis, uh, the iconic civil rights leader who died, recently, who said there is good trouble and there's bad trouble, and you shouldn't hesitate to get into good trouble. You shouldn't hesitate to become involved in the fight for justice, in the fight for goodness. So I'm not surprised. I mean, we have an inequitable world, both globally and nationally. You have you know, governments where people feel that their interests are not being protected, are not being advanced, where they feel that they're being marked all over. And you see, from time to time, the people boil over. How many revolutions have we had in the world? If we start, let me not go too far back. The French Revolution, do you know over what it started? People were hungry. They couldn't even buy bread. They couldn't afford to buy bread on the streets of Paris. And the queen said, well, let them eat cake. How insensitive can you be? Obviously, things then, riots, violence, and then the revolution. Her husband, the king, lost his head, and she herself, Antoinette, lost her head to the guillotine. Then you had the Russian Revolution, again, where the Tsars protested at their conditions of life. And of course, Lenin rushed back from Austria to capture the demonstration, the violence that took place in Russia at that time. And again, the royal family were executed, and that led to the Russian Revolution. So, we've always had periodically when people simply feel they've been pushed to the wall, that they have nothing else to lose. And so, this happens. And don't let us even forget the most famous revolution of it all, the American Revolution, a reaction to British colonialism. Go and read the Declaration of Independence. That is still till today, that document is more famous than the Marxist doctrine. Or more famous than any of Karl Marx's writing. That document is quoted in the cellars of every, revolution, every, movement where people are saying enough is enough. And Kennedy's saying epitomizes it all or encapsulates it all. People who do not make peaceful changes possible make violent changes inevitable. So that is the way I see what's happening all over the world that you've drawn our attention to. It doesn't mean that all of them are going to succeed. Even what we refer to as the Arab Spring. As usual, the Arab Spring was successful in some Arab countries. It was a disaster for some Arab countries because the moment there are always people with different agenda who, whether nationally or globally, who derail the purity of these young people, the purity in their heart, who they capture the movement, they derail the objectives. But in some countries, they succeed. But believe me, everywhere where where the movement is derailed, that seeds have been planted. They will germinate and they will come up again. I mean, after all, as I said, the Russian Revolution was not started by the communists. They captured it. And yet today now, took a long time. It cost a lot of lives, a lot of bloodshed. The superstructure of the Soviet Union that was built on that Russian Revolution exploded, destroyed itself. And we haven't seen the end of the of the movement in Russia. The same thing in the United States. So I'm not picking on the Russians. The same thing with the United States. You've seen the demonstrations on the street on Black Lives Matter. This Black Lives Matter resurrected the hopes and aspirations of the anti-slavery movement, which started, ages ago. Just like the Pan-African movement was born out of slavery. And Pan-Africanism, the African Union, these were all children of the anti-slavery movement, which are still germinating and growing and maturing, in Africa.
Prof, one of the concerns being raised is that some of these protests are not just the general peaceful protests. They're becoming more violent. We are having people coming in, taking over. We saw in the United States, for example, and you spoke to this last week, Prof, where in some of these protests, the people who have been arrested for trying to kidnap a governor were seen at those protests. And people are saying, how do you have peaceful protests when you have this kind of people that are mixing with the protesters?
They are urgent provocateurs. Unfortunately, is one of the factors that is one of the dangers that movements like this will have to confront. Recall that I said, maybe 2 minutes ago, that there will always be people who will derail the movement, the purity of the youth. It has always happened. The Jacobins captured, if you like, the purity of the French Revolution. Just not meant to be that bloody. Doesn't that meant to result in the guillotine? And I think it took about 10 to 15 years for Napoleon to now come and restore order in France. So, unfortunately, these are historical things, that happen. The people who later on now are being accused of planning to kidnap governors and so on, who infiltrated the, Black Lives Matter are not the only agents provocateurs. There will be those that be planted there by the establishment itself. So because the establishment is never in favor no matter what they mouth, they are never in favor of these demonstrations. Their emphasis is more on law and order rather than justice. Um, even during the time when Martin Luther King was demonstrating, and Lyndon B. Johnson was was embracing the "we shall overcome," the FBI was given a free hand to disrupt the civil rights movement. So I'm sorry, it happens. Stuff happens.
Yeah. While we're on this point, Prof, we had the news in the course of the week or a number of days back now regarding the role that ECOWAS played in the situation in Mali and how sanctions have now been lifted. Um, but Prof, regarding the role of ECOWAS in resolving, or at least putting some framework for resolution in place, what are your views on that and the broader context of ECOWAS intervening in issues that have to do with nations? Because it seems like it's only when we have big issues like military taking over that we hear a lot of big news about ECOWAS. Can you help to give some context to that, sir?
Well, yes. And in discussing that, forgive me if I stretch it to include Cote d'Ivoire now, Ivory Coast, because the same issues are involved. Now, what we call the success of ECOWAS in Mali, to me, is simply covering up the nakedness of the military intervention with the fig leaf of sprinkling of civilians. Yes, rather than have a purely exclusive military regime in Mali, they have a retired military officer as president, and they have as prime minister a former foreign minister. But the core coupists are still the vice president, minister of defense. They still occupy key positions. But, it's like, well, ECOWAS has gone as far as it could go without itself in having to invade Mali. They themselves now put in place a no, civilian government. What people tend to forget, and this is where the issue in Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire comes in, is that there are articles in the Charter of the African Union, which, of course, are binding on ECOWAS countries as well, which commits African countries to good governance, uh, acceptance of court orders, legal orders, commitment to free, fair, and transparent elections. Those articles are there in the Charter of the African Union. But there are probably about 13 African countries that have breached those articles of commitment. Either the government have extended their stay beyond what the Constitution provides, or they are maintaining their stay in office through crooked elections, or they are not obeying legally given court orders, especially when it comes to protection of human rights of their citizens. And yet, ECOWAS, or the African Union for that matter, do not interpose themselves when established governments are breaking these articles. It's only when an extra constitutional agency like the army says, we are the only one now who can protect the rights of the people. We are the only ones who can bring you, the government, to order, that ECOWAS or the African Union then remembers that they also have powers under the Charter of the African Union or the Charter of ECOWAS to ensure that civilian governments are not overthrown by the army. And I think this is unfortunate because the African Union or ECOWAS should not be seen as now agents of oppression who will only support oppressive governments. ECOWAS and the African Union should find their way back to that fine balance where they also will now be telling governments, you are straying. I haven't had ECOWAS say anything about what is happening in Cote d'Ivoire, where there's a presidential election coming. Two of the candidates have now withdrawn from that election on the grounds that Alassane Ouattara, the present president, has done 2 terms and that the Constitution does not allow him to do a 3rd term. Now, in fairness to him, he actually had agreed not to contest this election. The man that his party endorsed as their candidate, who was the prime minister, all of a sudden had a heart attack in the middle of a cabinet meeting and died there and there. So they were now left with no candidate. And Alassane Ouattara then said, well, I will now step in to continue. You don't want to tell me that in the whole of Ivory Coast, the ruling party cannot find a credible candidate that they can sponsor. Don't tell me that. I mean, I know Ivory Coast. It's one of the most developed culturally, intellectually, politically. I mean, this was the country of Ofebonye. And Alassane Ouattara knows what he went through. He took the intervention, actually, of French troops and ECOWAS troops to install Ouattara in office. And I'm surprised that he will have such a short memory that he will be doing this. But I expect ECOWAS to step forward now and not wait until good governance, term elongation have all been violated, and then it now starts blaming the opposition rather than the government.
Thank you for that. Prof, while still on this issue of these international bodies, earlier on in the week, Saudi Arabia was rejected from joining the UN Council. What are your reactions to that?
This is the Council of on Human Rights, I
Human
believe.
Rights Council, yes.
Yeah. Um, on one hand, I'm surprised. On the other hand, I'm not surprised. Why am I surprised? Because actually there have been states notorious for violation of human rights who have been voted on to the council in the past, and some still went through this time. So if Saudi Arabia had gone through, I would simply be saying, well, it's business as usual. But this time, remembering how that journalist was killed, remembering the report filed by the United Nations rapporteur on that matter, which clearly indicts Saudi Arabia, I believe that member countries still just felt that it would be a slap in the face of the United Nations itself if Saudi Arabia does not receive a slap on the wrist by being denied membership of the Human Rights Council. Um, this also may be a reflection of the weakness of the United States in the international community, because in the past, the United States would probably have stepped into the battle and put some pressure, campaign on the sides of its ally, put some pressure on member states, and perhaps squeeze Saudi Arabia through. But the United States is busy embroiled in an election. Its president uh, was not well at that time from COVID-19, and the United States is in bad odor within the international community. So I'm not surprised.
Prof, you talk about the United States there. I think that's probably a good point for us to start to look at some of the developments in that space, because some of the news coming out, uh, particularly in this run up to the election, regarding the democratic process in the United States, it is quite baffling for a lot of people, and would like to know your views, because we're hearing all sorts about ballot boxes. Fake news has gone to another level. And what would it be like? Do you see the United States starting to lose their position even as the democratic leader?
Well, I think that we should thank the social media. I think this is one of those issues that we should thank the social media, that we see the positive aspects of the information revolution, uh, and the agencies that have promoted and are promoting the information um, environment. Obviously, These things have been going on for a very long time. But it's just now that we get to know about them. Before, and I'm saying this with all due sense of responsibility, before the regular media actually would have suppressed the information about rigging, about voters suppression. Because in a way at that time, um, the regular media were in cahoots with the establishment to show America in a very positive light, because the United States was involved in this Cold War with the Soviet Union. Therefore, America must be shown in a positive light to the rest of the world. And therefore, the television stations, the major newspapers will have suppressed this news. Now, they cannot filter this news out because everybody has become a journalist. And if you were in Georgia and you've had to step in line for 5 hours, 7 hours before you can cast your ballot, you can easily just put it on the internet yourself, or your son, or your daughter, or your husband, or your wife could do so for you, and therefore you could not suppress it. So we are starting to see the United States, warts and all. And to some extent, I feel bad about it because the world needs a leader on whom the hope of human rights, hope, brotherly love, all those things we talked about in the papal encyclicals at the beginning of this program, that we can have that hope that they will mature, because there is one giant country out there that epitomizes human dignity, human rights, hope, etc., etc. But to now know that the country that we thought, reading their Declaration of Independence, was that country that was going to be the light on the hill, that if you were being oppressed in your own country and you look through the window of your cell, the bars of your cell, the shining light that you are seeing is the shining light of hope. Do not think that it is fake, that there is no such shining light. It is demoralizing. And I hope, and that's all one could just say, that its effect on the election that's going to be that's coming up in 3 weeks' time will not be detrimental to the outcome. It will still affect it, but hopefully, as people like Kennedy, as people like um, um, Obama, as people like Clinton squeezed through, hopefully, a candidate and a president will emerge that perhaps will could go and trim that wick and relight that candle.
Prof, how difficult would that be for one if Biden were to win the election? Uh, how difficult a task would it be for him to rebuild the image of the United States to the place it was before? And can they ever regain that position?
Well, don't ever give up on hope. In hope, we survive. He himself, if he wins, will understand what that victory means, not just for America, but for the whole world, that he has a job to do. It's not just going to be triumphalism. We, the Americans, we are back, No, he knows he will have to reclaim and fight for that high ground. The presence of Kamala Harris as his vice president, if he wins, will be a major signal. She will play a big role. She will be a major factor in saying, probably there will have to be a confession, that America has derailed in the past 4 years, that things have not been what it should have been, but that the America you are used to is back. He will have to fight for it. I don't think you can't just have that, triumphalism that you tend to get from the United States. You're not going to get that triumphalism. What you are going to get is, as I said, hope achieved to some extent, and then become a partner in rebuilding the international community. A
Prof,
partner
there's a
rebuilding the
point.
international community.
There's a point I want to raise here, because in these elections, what we're seeing here is uh, a complex scenario like we've never seen before in the history of the United States, which you have alluded to. But I think it was just this evening we're hearing the news that even people within the circle of Kamala Harris are now starting to come up with positive COVID-19 tests, and we're suddenly starting to get the circle of people who should be put forward are now at risk of being infected by this deadly disease. Do you foresee a situation where this combination of events could still lead to the elections being delayed in the United States? Would there be valid grounds for them to even consider such?
No, no, no. We are too far gone in the process. Number two, thank God that the principal actors involved have somehow are on their feet. Uh, Trump, who got it, is back on his feet somehow. Kamala Harris herself um, um, was not affected, and Biden himself has not, been a victim of the COVID-19. So let us hope in the next 2.5 to 3 weeks remaining, none of the major principles come down with it. Let us hope so.
Okay, sir. And
And
whilst
and you can see, the processes are still continuing. The campaigns are going on in one form or the other. The hearing on President Trump's Supreme Court nominee is going on. Congress is functioning. So I don't think they themselves will want to derail the apple cart at the tail end of this whole process.
Prof, are you surprised about the nomination and the fact that the Senate Judiciary Committee is continuing to meet despite all that's going on at this point in time? Are you surprised about that?
No, I'm not surprised. They have said they were going to do so. And they are doing what they promised they would do. And let me say this, the hearings have had a positive impact, at least definitely on me. I don't know how many people actually paid attention to the words of the candidate who has been assessed. There are two things she said that caught my attention and that signified actually a change, a shift. Maybe change is too strong a word. A shift in her position. The first one was when, under questioning, she said, "You assume that because I have been critical of the reasoning of the Chief Justice on one aspect of the Obamacare, therefore, I am totally against the Obamacare." She said, "I am not." That's how close she came to what I will call pre-commitment. She came that close. She said, "I am not." And secondly, when they pressed her further on another occasion by another senator, she said, "Don't forget, there is a rule of assessment when you are assessing a statute. If that part that is being challenged can be excised and it still leaves the core of the statute, you will simply excise it and go ahead to uphold the core of the statute." She said it is only if removing what is being challenged totally destroys the remaining parts of the statute then has no meaning. It's only then you will find the entire statute unconstitutional. Now, in the Commonwealth, a judicial tradition, they call that the red pen rule, where you can just take your red pen, you delete those sections that are being challenged, and then you look at the rest of the legislation, and it still makes sense. You uphold the legislation. So even courts are extremely reluctant to strike down an entire statute if they can avoid it. And she said that. And I think the Republican Party has just found out that they're getting a backlash from Americans who are beneficiaries of the Obamacare, that now the Republicans themselves are backing away from saying they want total removal of the Obamacare. They are now only saying there are aspects of it that they don't like. So those are my own two takeaways from the hearings. And I think that's, of course, I mean, you cannot predict a judge once he or she is now on the bench. But those two takeaways make me feel somewhat comfortable, given the fact that there's no way to stop uh, um, approval by the full Senate.
Thank you, Prof, for that. We have about 2 minutes left, but there is a question here about Israel and the West Bank and the fact that they have just approved for some houses to be built. I'm not sure we'll be able to do justice to that in the 1 minute that we've got. And we will start from there next week on this question, just to put that out there for our viewers. And in the time we've got left, Prof, any parting shots for tonight?
Well, I hope that our viewers have found it as interesting as I have. I've really had to crack my memory in dealing with some of the issues, that have come on the table. But I assure them, if there are areas where there have been some misleading on my part, I will be the first one next Thursday to say mea culpa and change things and correct things. But apart from that, I thank them again for being present with us, and I look forward to seeing them again next Thursday.
All right. Thank you all for joining us across all the platforms today. See you next week, same time, same place on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Bye for now.